Headline News. Today we will be discussing an event that impacted the world decades ago. April 3rd of this year will mark 68 years since President Harry Truman signed the Economic Recovery Act of 1948. Proposed by General George Marshall, this plan displayed the United States' support of those European nations weakened as a result of World War II. When Marshall suggested this act in 1947, Congress had hesitation and debated for several months. However, after an invasion into an unsteady nation in Central Europe, Congress quickly approved, and Truman signed the final decision. Marshall, along with the other creators of the plan, George Kennan and William Clayton, believed that in order to rebuild strong and stable governments, the restoration of the nation's economies must occur first. Over the time span of about 4 years, $13 billion was provided in funds to aid 16 struggling nations. A specially created bureau, the Economic Cooperation Administration, led by Paul G. Hoffman, contributed these funds in order to make the Marshall Plan a success. When the funding ended in 1951, it had already left such an effective impact, transforming the nations to having revitalized economies and political stability. This did, however, add to the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The Soviets were constantly counteracting the United States' intentions and involvement in Europe. The formation and establishment of this plan arose more hostility and anger from the Soviets, as they were targeting the fragile nations for personal possession. The tension increased greatly due to the differences of the two nations' ambitions. Now on to Sarah, who will review the causes that led up to this enactment.
Thank you, Sarah, for that wonderful description. The Marshall Plan became the result of many leading problems that countries were in the midst of facing at the time. Europe was in ruins due to World War II that had occurred not long before. European economies were plundering, people were suffering from lack of food supplies, and industrial output decreased due to destroyed factories. While all this was affecting many European people, other countries ruled by communist parties seemed to be becoming more popular at this time, giving these parties a running chance in the upcoming election if things did not get better. The United States, who strongly opposes communism, was nervous about this party's potential rising. Therefore, George C. Marshall announced that the U.S. would provide help economically to those European countries in need. Americans felt it was necessary to protect their sphere of influence against communism. Not only had industrialization slowed down in Europe at the time, agriculture had slowed down as well due to the war and its conditions. The United States were able to step in considering the fact that this was the only country that had not been destroyed by the war. Ultimately, the cause of this plan's information was due to the terrible economic situation Europe was facing and this potential election of the Communist Party. Next, we have Jamie, who will go into the effects this plan had.
Thank you, Sarah, for that great explanation. The Marshall Plan had good effects for any person that did not want communism in Europe. The Marshall Plan was able to offer extensive amounts of funding from the U.S. to help rebuild and strengthen Western Europe, which in turn made the spread of communism from Eastern Europe much harder. The Soviet-owned parts of Europe were not helped by the plan. The Marshall Plan displayed Truman's consistent goal of taking action for the common good of humanity and not trying to make America the superior nation of the world as the Soviet Union was striving to do. They wanted Germany to pay $20 million for the wrongs done to them during the war. America also realized that if they helped to fix the damaged western region of Europe, that American taxpayers would not be burdened with having to help pay German reparations and would also be creating more vendors to buy American products. The Marshall Plan also led to the NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. George Marshall won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1953 and was the only general ever to receive a Nobel Prize for Peace. Now, let's switch over to Erin to talk about how Truman's attitude was during the whole event.
Thank you, Jamie. Many people debate how Truman is viewed as a result of the Marshall Plan. However, the Marshall Plan was well worth the cost. It was necessary in the light that it established a precedent for U.S. foreign affairs to follow for many years to come. While it assisted the European countries that were in economic crisis after World War II, it also helped the American economy. The act ensured that other European powers would be able to continue trading with the United States, helping the American economy. But by giving the European countries money to fix their economy, the European countries were also benefiting directly. Truman enacted this to ensure that the world would not repeat another Great Depression. He was able to identify the causes that led to the Great Depression, then think ahead and think quickly to fix these problems before they could amount to anything more. Truman was also looking to block the Soviet Union out of Europe and establish American dominance in these powers. Although it looks like Truman was just helping the European countries, this is not nearly everything that the Marshall Plan accomplished. It did immensely help these powers, however, it also did much more and helped the American economy. Some may criticize Truman because he spent too much money on this cause. In the end, America did end up spending $13 billion, which is a huge amount of money, not to be overlooked, especially coming out of a time of war. However, America would end up saving lives and human suffering by avoiding a Great Depression. The New Deal cost about $50 billion. A second Great Depression could cost even more than that, on top of the suffering of millions of Americans. So to spend less money up front and prevent another Great Depression, the Marshall Plan was beneficial. Truman was thinking ahead and smart in taking action when it was needed. If we take a look at this primary source, we are looking at the Economic Recovery Act that was signed into law from President Truman on April 3, 1948. It is the official enactment of the Marshall Plan. The plan led to the creation of the act, and it is the same thing just under a different name. And that's all the time we have left. Thanks for watching CNN News.